So our final theme for this afternoon is theme 6, which is about climate change or climate adaptation, integration and infrastructure investigations. Now, unfortunately, Mike Dunlop couldn't be here today, but we have got a pre-recording from him. And as I mentioned, we have been, we think we fixed the sound issue, so we hope you'll be able to hear these. But just a reminder, you'll be able to obtain links to all of the presentations from today's sessions. Now, I'm looking at Amy. Amy, we're going to do the count. No, sorry, I'm just coordinating because we have to make it link with the TVs. 3, 2, 1, go.
Hi, I'm Michael Dunlop. I'm the project leader of the climate adaptation component of the Healthy Coorong Healthy Basin project. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person today. I hope the technology works for us all. The aim of the Climate Adaptation Project is to help managers, local communities and other stakeholders anticipate and effectively prepare for difficult future decisions about managing the Coorong as the climate continues to change and the character of the Coorong evolves. You'll see that the focus of the project is on people, the decisions they'll have to make, and continuing change. So far in the project, we've been trying to understand the context in which future decisions will be made. This has included looking at how the Coorong has changed in the past and what physical and ecological change processes can be anticipated. We've been drawing insights based on the synthesis of existing research and documents. What's clear from looking at the history of the Coorong is that the region has been ever-changing. Key features include the critical importance of water and how it flows, and the relationship between physical change and societal values. If we look at water, the dynamics of freshwater and marine influences helped create the lower lakes in the Coorong, in the case of the Coorong about 8,000 years ago, and they've influenced the Coorong and the lakes continually to this day. River Murray regulation and extraction, the building of the barrages and drainage have all contributed to reductions in freshwater flows. Obviously, there have been periodic droughts that have greatly exacerbated reductions in flows, and in general, reduction in flows have led to increases in salinisations and nutrient concentrations. What's also quite clear is that the complex hydrology of the system has created the diversity of habitats and species, and this has underpinned the livelihoods of First Nations and Europeans throughout time. If we look at the human history of the Coorong, it began with settlement by First Nations many thousands of years ago, before the Coorong was formed. Then there was European contact and formal colonisation in 1930, followed by ongoing process of settlement and creation of infrastructure and roads and the like. Key economic interests of Europeans were started with droving and grazing, and then there was the development of irrigation and dryland farming and fisheries, and now tourism is a major sector. Commercial navigation of the Murray Mouth and the river were key parts of the European story, and native title was granted to most of the Coorong in 2017. What's really interesting, looking at the history of the Coorong, is an ancient practice of conserving values in the region. This is evident in Ngarrindjeri stories, and with Europeans it started with the protection of pelican breeding grounds and the management of duck hunting. It's that conservation ethic is part of the reason we have regulation of water extractions, the provision of environmental flows, and it underpins the Ramsar listing. What's clear from looking at the history of change is this complex interplay between physical and social changes, with changing social values driving physical changes and physical changes affecting the things that people value. So to summarise this ever-changing Coorong, the Coorong region is an interlinked physical and social system that is continuously evolving on multiple timeframes. There are deep cultural connections and multiple economic and social values that have persisted throughout periods of significant change. And this is this history of constant change is important context in which decisions we made in the future about further change. We reviewed the future ecological change processes in the Coorong to help guide future deliberation on the decisions that people might need to make. Our intention was to scope the multiple different types of change that might occur and, where possible, look at the magnitude of change. In the coming activities, we will synthesise this into some scenarios. What's quite clear from this work is that there are multiple change processes and many different interacting factors. There's going to be a lot of ecological change, and there's the potential for it to be particularly significant. Some aspects of change are better understood than others, but we can expect that some of the less well understood ones will also be important, and so there will always be a considerable amount of uncertainty about anticipating the change. I've included this example from Climate Change in Australia. This website provides this tool that helps you explore the magnitude of climate change. What I've done here is selected a place, Victor Harbor, that hopefully you're all familiar with, and asked the question, what places around Australia might currently have a climate that resembles the climate that Victor Harbor might have in the future? What this tool proposes is that the places shown are likely to be similar, and you would know better than I, but I'm pretty clear that Northern, Coorong are quite different, have quite different climates to Victor Harbor now, and the livelihoods and lifestyles associated with the climate are different. That gives you an indication of how significant future climate change might be for the current region. If we focus on the hydrology, it's pretty clear it's going to get drier and sea level is going to rise. Across the Murray-Darling Basin, we can expect decreases in rainfall, maybe up to 40% by 2090, and increases in evapotranspiration. What this will do is result in significant reductions in inflows into the River Murray, and accompanied with that will be increases in demand for water from both irrigation and for the environment. Together, that equation suggests changes to water allocations might result, but we don't know how that's going to unfold. This will mean, one way or the other, significant reductions of the flows into Lake Alexandrina. As well as reductions in the averages, there'll be changes to variability. We can expect more time in drought, and then the changes to the operations of the barrages and any other infrastructure will also change the hydrology. So as well as reduced freshwater flows, there's likely to be increases in sea level, and that seawater is likely to get warmer and more acidic over time. So those changes in flows and hydrology will be compounded by complex hydrological processes in the Coorong, lower lakes and the Murray mouth, with the net result of reduced water levels, especially in the Coorong, potentially also in the lakes, less freshwater input, decreased connectivity, increased concentration of salt and nutrients, and increased acidity. Increasing sea level may mitigate reduced freshwater flows in the Coorong, but they're also likely to lead to overtopping of the barrages. Looking at the ecology, we can expect significant changes across the whole food web. Past responses, especially in the Millennium Drought, show a very high sensitivity of many ecological aspects of the region to changed hydrology, and we can expect future changes to be driven largely by hydrological changes, but temperature and acidity are also likely to be important. The changes we can anticipate include in water, changes to salt and nutrient concentrations and dynamics, changes to oxygen and turbidity levels, and changes to water levels. Habitats are likely to be affected in the sediments, in the water column, in the intertidal and seasonally inundated zone and onshore. Algal blooms are likely to be more frequent. We've already got problems with filamentous algae. We can expect continuing impacts on seagrass, including rupia, emergent plants and fringing vegetation, and impacts on invertebrates, fish and bird communities, especially those with specific habitat requirements. There are likely to be winners and losers. The impacts are going to vary among taxonomic groups, among species and among different places, and there'll be sort of complex interactions between places and groups as the changes unfold. What's clear is there likely to be lots of ecological change, but it's also quite likely that the region, the lakes and the Coorong will still support a wide diversity of habitats, which will support a wide diversity of species, things that the Coorong are important for. The key points that we've learnt in this project so far about the long history of change, the importance and complexity of hydrology, the interconnected nature of physical change and societal values, the wide diversity in habitats of species supporting multiple values, and the persistence of ecological diversity and societal values through change will be used to inform the way we develop analysis processes that are going to be used to help managers and other stakeholders prepare for decisions in response to future change.
Thanks to Mike, what a great presentation, and just sitting there listening to him was still really valuable, and of course we had the screens in the room. I'd now like to welcome up Michelle Waycott to talk to us about science integration. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, and hello again, everyone. I feel a little awkward about coming after Mike's talk because he actually presented somewhat of a challenging view of what the future of the Coorong is if we're anywhere near right about some of our climate modelling. And so I think that makes it even more important that some of the work that we're doing in this integration project is very collaborative and reaches out across all the various parts of the program that we need to bring together, share and work into future options for us. Now, this is a complicated diagram and I just wanted to put it up briefly so that I can give you a sense of the fact that the main part of integration is here in the middle, and I'll talk more detail about that in a minute. But there's a lot of inputs coming into it. We're drawing information from the historical information, data sets. We've heard a lot of data sets talked about today that have long-term monitoring programs. Those data are coming into our team. And then we're bringing that together with all the other trials and investigations research projects and all of the component leads actively working with us, and we're in a whole range of different activities with them to make sure that amazing new knowledge that they generate comes in and is used really well. In addition, there's a whole bunch of ways the information is going to go out, and that's out into a range of products from this project, but also things like this, sharing information with you both informally and formally into the other Healthy Coorong, Healthy Basin projects, and you're going to hear from Pete in a minute about one of the big ones, and then other trials and investigation components so that they can use the information we've pulled together back into their projects and get a bigger value add. So how are we going to do this? Well, the overall trials and investigation program has 7, 8, I don't know how many components to it. Our component is called Component 7, and we have 5 activities within it. But the real centre of our work is about bringing the information and being able to share it, analyse it, and understand it in a coherent way. And to do that, we heard the talk earlier this morning from Matt Gibbs around modelling, and in particular using a really sophisticated, long, hard-won model around the hydrology and the water movements, with all of these biological components coming in. And these aren't things that are just started yesterday. These are things that have been building up sometimes for more than a decade. And so it's really important to recognise that this is building on what came before. To do that, we not only have the model, the models that have been developed in the past, we have a very large number of data sets. And so all of the trials and investigation components or projects have done a really incredible job of synthesising the literature and the knowledge base that they are starting with at the beginning of their project. And those reports are now coming through to us, and then we'll be able to benefit from that knowledge synthesis. But also we've been working together with a couple of people from DEW to map out where all the data sets are and how we can share them. So a really active process. We also have these three boxes here are around the active generation of not only models, but how the models can be used in decision-making frameworks and how to develop scenarios for the future. You just heard Mike talk about the climate adaptation component of that. We have also around a range of management scenarios. And we heard this morning a couple of really good examples of how the evidence that are generated from both monitoring and research are being used to make decisions around where and when water's released, where and when we can improve options for, say, the fish survivorship, and we need to go into a broader space for other organismal groups. And then one of the important components here is the active process of synthesis, interpretation and integration that uses all of these models, scenario runs, all the data sets, input from the community to generate a framework of knowledge that can be used for the future. And we've developed a tool for doing that, which we're calling State of the Coorong, that can help inform a whole community of users. And this is essentially an evolving, emerging science product. So our goal is to provide knowledge translation, the application of that knowledge and new science to support site management. When I say site, I mean the focus is on the southern Coorong, but I don't think we, as we've heard today, I don't think we separate that from the overall site of the Coorong as a whole. That involves a consolidation process and an integration process across all HCHB applications. And so our integration team works really hard on the various working groups associated with other HCHB projects, including the infrastructure or on-ground works or water quality monitoring. There's a whole range of other activities, and we try to engage with those groups actively. The modelling itself, and we're very fortunate to work with a really sophisticated and well-developed group of modellers who in my experience, unusually open to collaboration and open to ideas of adapting their models in different ways. And they're not frightened of saying, oh, no, we can't do that, but let's try this other way of doing it, and then working with us. So I think we're very fortunate there to have some options open to us. And then the team that I work with within HCHB's integration team have a lot of skills in how information is used in policy and management decision making, and so we're bringing that to the table. How do we do this? We essentially have a workflow, and here's a bit of an easier way to view it. We take synthesis of information, go through a series of steps, which includes identifying knowledge gaps, and that's partly what's led to the T&I investigations that we're doing in the research projects. Work out if we need to adapt or modify our monitoring, and we already know in some cases we need to do that. Develop a synthesis of that knowledge and interpret that for a system-wide understanding, and that's where the modelling interacts with our biologists and our hydrologists and a whole range of other decision-making options. And then this is also where we often need to go back up to the top. And I know people get frustrated at this, but once we get down here, we sometimes realise, oh, okay, that changes the reality of what we think the system's doing and how it's working. And we definitely know we're there now compared to, say, 5 years ago. So how are we going to use that, and how are we going to then improve our understanding of the system? And then this seems like a little statement here, provide synthesis for the use in decision making. Those of you who've worked both in research and in management and decision making will realise sometimes the gulf between the two, the actual data that you have and then how can you use it, is extreme. And so our team worked really hard to try to bring those two together and to understand them. Last year we worked at Gus's strident request. We worked really hard together to set a starting point for what our expectations of the system were. So there's a whole range of work that's been done historically, and so we developed this desired state framework that we'll be updating as we go through the whole of our integration project, adding things as we go. So right at the start, we developed a summary of what the environmental value of the system was, the salinity changes, profiles, thresholds, how eutrophication was working, and the food webs. And the T&I project leads were involved with this, as well as other experts. And from that, we produced a document which is available that describes a version which is the current state, what happens if we do nothing from last June, what happens if we were to achieve what we think is a good place to be, and some ideas for how to get there. And so forcing ourselves to actually really go through those steps, ask the questions, and where the evidence base was to get us to that was extremely valuable and has helped us all work together a bit more clearly to answer questions in an extremely time-constrained research environment. So what happens next? The integration team is trying to provide all of the synthesis and insight into how the next steps get made by the overall HCHB program from a science perspective. That means we're working with Pete's team particularly to try to get the knowledge base in the format and with the right pieces of the puzzle for the decisions to be made. So how do we do that? We're using this approach where we're bringing together that information, but I think what's really important here is also listening to all of the questions and the knowledge gaps that we're constantly exposed to by putting these ideas out there. And so I think in fora like we have today, as well as our research team meetings, we're always asking questions and not assuming that we actually have all the answers yet. And we've got this small window of opportunity to contribute and to get a better outcome for everyone. So I'm going to hand over to Pete now. He's going to tell us a little bit about what's next. But I'm really proud of the team that I work with in this project. They do amazing things, and they're all working really, really hard. Like I said, very tight timelines often to bring together disparate and really often novel information for use for everyone to understand the system better. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. And yes, we have Pete Mettam to talk to us about infrastructure investigations. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Mettam, or Pete, as you've heard me referred to many times today. I'm a senior project officer for the There we go, excellent. Senior Project Officer for the Health Coorong Healthy Basin Program and the coordinator for one of the projects under the initiative called the Coorong Infrastructure Investigations Project. And now this project was developed recognising that the scientific research that, although very extremely important, is unlikely to fix the Coorong on its own. And this is probably something that's been reinforced a little bit by Mike's presentation today. So the Coorong Infrastructure Investigations Project is aiming to take the scientific information that you've heard today and apply it to investigating the feasibility of multiple infrastructure and management solutions to support the long-term ecological health of the Coorong. And when we say long-term, we're talking 20 years plus. So the Coorong Infrastructure Investigations Project started at the beginning of 2020, and our first step of the project was to identify and explore what options at a high level may provide benefit to the Coorong. Now, to support this process of identifying options, we undertook some significant consultations with community and stakeholders, as well as with scientific and engineering experts, to ask them what they thought at a high level might be worth considering. From there, then we moved on to our next step of undertaking some preliminary evaluations and a lot more consultation to try and shortlist these options down to the options that we felt warranted further investigations through feasibility assessments. So then once they were shortlisted, we progressed to the current stage that we're currently going through now, which is our feasibility investigations, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But just very briefly on the feasibility assessments, they are multifaceted investigations aimed at not only determining which options are feasible to construct, but also which ones are going to have the desirable outcome for the Coorong. Now, these feasibility investigations will continue throughout most of this year and ultimately lead to helping us determine which options are feasible and desirable, and then they will be progressed to business case development for further consideration by the Commonwealth, and then ultimately, hopefully, for the options that we want, leading to implementation and construction. So this list of options you can see here are the long list, if you will, of options that we considered. Quite a few of them, you'll notice, have been previously investigated, but often investigated for other objectives other than for the Coorong. So following the identification of this list, we undertook a process to try and shortlist them down for further, to determine which ones we wanted to take to that next level of investigation. And to undertake this, again, we did a lot of community consultation and stakeholder consultation, as well as undertook a more technical multi-criteria analysis, where we did a bit of a preliminary assessment of each of the options from a technical feasibility perspective, and then collectively using both of these things to help us narrow that down to a shortlist. Now, so I can say that we've shortlisted this long list here down to 5 options that we're taking to that next level of investigation. And included within the 5 options I'm about to talk about, we are considering variations of those options and also combinations of those options, because it's very likely that not one of these options on its own is going to be the silver bullet that saves the Coorong. We might need to consider multiples of these to help get that benefit. And it should also be noted that while we are doing feasibility assessments on these 5 options, we haven't committed to constructing any of them or doing business cases for any of them at this stage. Only after the feasibility assessments, when we've determined which ones are likely to have the best impact and we want to construct, we'll go to that stage. So now, these are the 5 shortlisted options that we've selected for feasibility investigations. Now, they're not in any particular order of priority. It's actually geographical order, so starting at up the top near the Goulburn barrages all the way down to the southeast. Now, the first option I'll talk about very briefly is additional automated barrage gates. So this involves assessing whether adding additional automated gates to the barrages, the Goulburn barrages, can help us improve our delivery of River Murray water into the Coorong. The next one on the list, many of you will have heard of this one before, but a Lake Albert to Coorong connector. And this option is about whether or not we can make a connection between the southern part of Lake Albert into the Coorong to, again, improve that delivery of River Murray water into the Coorong. The next option, Coorong Lagoon dredging to improve connectivity. This one involves looking at where we can remove constricted points throughout the Coorong to help with that flow between the two lagoons, the help flow of water back and forward. And the next one, a connection between the Southern Ocean, the Coorong Lagoon and the Southern Ocean, to see whether or not we can, putting a connection there can help us either import fresher marine water into the Coorong or help us export the hypersaline water out of the Coorong, or both. Either go two-directional. The last one is further augmentation of southeast flows, and this involves looking if we can build on the previous work done with the Southeast Flows Restoration Project by diverting some additional southeast drainage flows that are currently going out to sea into the Coorong South Lagoon. Now I'm going to briefly talk about the feasibility investigations that and the sorts of investigations we are currently undertaking to determine the feasibility and desirability of these options. Now, this investigation is trying to answer a very complex question of what's going to be the best for the long-term future of the Coorong. So it must consider benefits, impacts and trade-offs collectively, not only from an ecological perspective, but also social, cultural and economic perspective as well. So our investigations broadly fit into three categories, underlined or supported by a foundation of stakeholder and community consultations. Now, the ecological investigations, the first column there, takes a lot of the information that you've heard today and applies them to our assessments through target ecological response modelling, including significant hydrodynamic modelling, biogeochemical modelling and habitat suitability modelling, as well as undertakes evaluations through ecological assessments and ecological risk assessments, and expert evaluation to help us analyse this modelling and the recommendations that we're receiving from the other science in order to help determine from an ecological perspective which options likely have the best benefit or least impacts as well. Now, the engineering investigations, a lot of this is around determining site suitability, so doing things like geotechnical investigations, geomorphology and site surveys, as well as, very importantly, developing concept designs that take the functional requirements, what we need this infrastructure to actually do, and puts them into a design brief and designs them up and to give us the most appropriate design to hit the objectives we're trying to. And the other major field of investigation is the socio-economic investigations. So this involves things like undertaking socio-economic impact assessments and also undertaking consultations with landowners who may be affected or will have their land might be affected by some of these options. And then also undertaking cultural heritage assessments and consultation and evaluations by First Nations for each of the options. And then also finishing up with undertaking value for money assessments to help us determine which options likely give us our best value. Oh, God, that came quick. So each stream of the investigations will help pull together to help us make that final decision on which option we want to see go through that business case development. They also support each other, providing very important information to help those other investigations, such as the ecological investigations and the stakeholder consultations are very important for helping us develop up our concept designs, giving us feedback and recommendations of what the option should do to meet the needs of not only the Coorong, but also the community and general regional area. Now, our investigations also need to be pretty iterative and adaptive as new information comes to light. A lot of these investigations that we've heard of today and these investigations we're doing now are running quite parallel. So as we learn new things through some of the information you've heard today or the studies you've heard today, adapting our investigations to incorporate that and change tact where we need to. And finally, following our decision-making process, all our evaluations and all the investigations will get summarised in feasibility assessment reports that will ultimately help support those business case developments and give us that rationale for why we've selected one option over another. So to very quickly summarise, we've selected 5 infrastructure options that we are undertaking feasibility investigations on over the next year. Now, these feasibility investigations are trying to answer a very complex question around what's going to be the best for the Coorong in the long term, so 20 plus years. And as part of those 5 options, we're also looking at whether combinations of those options will work better, or if we look at different variations of each of those options. We're taking the scientific information that you've heard today, and applying that to these investigations through our ecological, engineering and socio-economic investigations to help support that decision-making process. Now, throughout these investigations, we're committed to keeping the community involved and reporting back what we find as we go and keeping the community involved every step as we go. If you want to find out more about the process we went through to undertake the shortlisting, or you want to learn a bit more about the 5 options that we were taking forward to these feasibility investigations, you can go to the Project Coorong website. There's a Coorong Infrastructure Investigations project tab. Click on there and it'll take you to a couple of reports based on what we've done over the last year and where we're going. Thank you very much for having me and talking.
Thanks very much, Pete.